Hi, I'm Perry Cheverie, and welcome to Perry's Talk Box, the podcast series made exclusively for YouTube, here on Perch 1961. So I'm here, this is the first episode, and we have as our guest Doug Walsh from New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. I'm going to call him the ultimate James Bond fan. Would you agree with that, Doug?
I wouldn't necessarily say ultimate, but I have seen all the movies. I do have copies of all the movies, so I do enjoy the Bond character.
Excellent. And you also have a collection of the books. You've read most or all of the books. Is there the creator, of course, is Ian Fleming. Is there a big difference between what happens, the characters and the plots and so on in the books, and as opposed to the movies?
Okay. So if you look at the books for, say, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Dr. No, a lot of those stories are very close to what was on screen. Obviously, there's things that don't make it to screen for whatever reason, but they are fairly close to what the Bond books were all about.
Do you remember the first time you watched a James Bond movie, and do you remember what the movie was?
I'd have to say it was probably in high school. Mostly because I had some friends that were very big Bond fans. As far as the movie itself, it might have been Goldfinger, From Russia with Love, one of those early Connery movies.
Okay. What exactly is it about the James Bond movie series that keeps you watching, Doug?
So, the character itself, James Bond, very sophisticated character, very suave, as you see in some of the movies there. Likes to wear very fancy dinner jackets, very classy type of character. Kind of does his own thing, makes his own rules, and of course he's very popular with his female role characters. So it's a lot of intricacies to the character of James Bond itself.
There's been a number of Bonds, Sean Connery, Roger Moore, Daniel Craig, Pierce Brosnan, Timothy Dalton, just to name most or a few. Who is your favorite Bond?
Well, of course it has to be Sean Connery. Sean Connery, when he was playing the role of James Bond, I believe played it very close to the way that Ian Fleming had written the character in those books, so that's why I enjoy Sean Connery's movies.
And of course, just as interesting as the main character are the villains, the foes. Do you have a favorite villain?
So favorite villain for me would be the Blofeld characters. Who you see the Blofeld character in a lot of those earlier movies. In the most recent Daniel Craig movie, Spectre, they brought back the Blofeld character, which was great to see. But Blofeld and Spectre has always been a major nemesis for the Bond character.
I was going to touch a little bit on the car. Now, the car seems to be an important element in the movies. James Bond's car is almost an extension of himself. Very important visually and a part of the films. Can you comment on that?
Well, of course, the cars have all the tools and gadgets and weaponry and etc. that Bond needs to do his job. You know, it can go underwater and act like a submarine. It can eject your enemy out if they're sitting next to you, as it did in Goldfinger. You can track your villains to wherever their hideout is. It's just an extension of what he needs to do. What he needs to have to do his job.
And of course, you were mentioning the gadgets too. There's so many different gadgets that have played an important part of the James Bond movies. Can you name a few?
Well, of course, yeah. There's always been gadgets, and the gadgets have always been provided by Q. And there's been some unique gadgets over the years in the movies. There was one called Little Nelly, which was almost like a glider airplane that was used in You Only Live Twice, so that he could fly over certain areas, and he was looking to see where the villain's headquarters was. He had devices for breathing underwater that would just be almost like an oxygen supply. Just so many different gadgets, and again, just stuff that he needed to kind of survive.
There's been a lot of action movies these days, and over the last 50 years that James Bond has been occupying the big screen. How do the Bond movies hold up against maybe the more contemporary movies? Because it's still been going after 40 or 50 or more years. There's a lot of action movies out these days, very high budget, big special effects, everything else, lots of pizzazz. How do the James Bond movies stand up next to them?
Well, I think with the Bond movies, there's a bit more reality to the action that's in the movies. Sometimes you'll watch, for instance, like a Die Hard movie, and you see Bruce Willis and you see him performing all this stuff and surviving the most ridiculous things that happen to him there, and it's so unbelievable, as opposed to when you watch the Bond movies, anything that he's usually dealing with is fairly believable that he could survive something like that.
Ursula Andress, Barbara Bach, Halle Berry, just a few of the James Bond women that have been in the movies. Why are they such an important element in the films?
Wow. I guess you'd have to look at it on a film-by-film basis, because obviously the role of the Bond girls in the earlier movies, such as Dr. No with Ursula Andress, and the more recent movies, the female characters have taken on a different role as opposed to just being, let's say, eye candy and just somebody that was Bond's interest or bed interest or whatever, and now they're kind of at that level of Bond that they're like a partner, or definitely contributing more than they did in the earlier movies.
A little bit more well-rounded, more intelligent, really taking part in helping Bond out rather than just being a sex object kind of thing, I guess is what you're saying.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, Doug, not a lot of people know this. You're very modest about this too. You're a bit of a filmmaker yourself, and you've done some short films, as I have. You've been influenced by James Bond. You've made a few short movies. Can you tell me a little bit, just shortly, about your movie making experience?
Well, back around the high school days, and even a little bit after high school there, myself and a group of my friends there, we'd make these movies that were highly influenced by the Bond character, and so we use a lot of the same sort of Bond I guess premise there. There would be the Bond character, obviously a different name. There would be his boss, which was kind of like the M character, and the supervillain character, and of course the little henchman character. So we were playing on it and just doing our own kind of take on the Bond character in a different aspect, I guess our own unique aspect. So it was fun to be influenced by Ian Fleming and the Bond movies themselves.
Low budget, but a lot of fun.
Very low budget, yeah.
Getting back to James Bond, are there any new Bond films that you know of that are in production or that will be coming out in the future?
Well, from what I've read online, I believe Daniel Craig is scheduled to be back in another Bond movie that is either getting ramped up for pre-production or into production. Obviously, it's not anything we're going to be seeing in the immediate future, but looking forward to seeing that down the road. And certainly, Daniel Craig has done very well to take on the mantle of the James Bond character. And I think he kind of plays the role similar to the way that Sean Connery had played it there. So it's good to see that return to the classiness and of James Bond.
Very good. Just as a last question, is there any particular direction that you'd like to see the James Bond series go in? Any place that he hasn't been to? Any particular type of adventure that he hasn't been that hasn't happened with him?
I think James Bond has pretty much done it all.
Yeah.
And I know now, of course, it's all new stories, of course, because any of the novels that were out that were created by Ian Fleming, either in their entirety or little short aspects of those books has already been used for the movies. So it's all new stories. So I don't know how they would really, what kind of direction they would go in, or what kind of direction I necessarily like to see. But I know they always keep the stories fresh and interesting and lots of action. So yeah, it's always something good to see.
In other words, he's pretty much done everything, but he's done it well and keep on doing it, right, Doug?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Doug, it has been a pleasure talking with you today. We're old friends, of course, and I want to thank you for coming in. This is Perry's Talk Box, and we'll catch you next time.